Hello everyone and welcome back to the World Rapid Championship. It's round 12 and Magnus Carlsen is the sole leader after 11 rounds. In the previous game he drew a game against Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. He had his opportunity but too quickly went for the end game. Now he faces Levon Aronian. He again gets the black pieces, but we already mentioned that on the final day he will have black 3 times and white only twice. So without further ado, let's check it out. Levon opens with d4, with knight to f6, c4, with e6, knight to f3, and d5, with knight to c3, and now c5. Going for the same opening he went for against Hrant Melkumyan, who is also from Armenia. We've covered his game from this World Rapid Championship, and Hrant Melkumyan is also, I don't know if he's currently, but he was Levon Aronian's second, so I'm sure both Levon and Melkumyan know the line that Magnus plays. We have c captures on d5, e captures on d5, so everything the same as in the game Carlsen Melkumyan, g3, and knight to c6. We have bishop to g2, preparing to castle, c captures on d4, knight captures, and bishop to c5. So following Carlsen's game against Melkumyan, knight captures on c6, b captures, and here we have castles. Magnus also castles, and queen to c2, so still following that game. We have bishop to b6 now, and knight to a4, and bishop to d7, and this is where the game takes a different approach here. If you remember, Melkumyan played a knight captures, a captures, and b4. He grabbed hold of the c5 square, not allowing Magnus to push c5, but here we have b3 by Levon. It's a new move in the position, and it is as of move 13 that we have a completely new game. So what's the idea? Okay, Magnus continues with rook to e8, bishop to b2 by Levon, fianchettoing the dark square bishop as well, and now h5, just preparing h4 and hoping to bust open the king side. And it was here about at this moment where Magnus started smiling for some reason. Maybe he had this, on the board at home. Maybe he knows that it's not as good as the line Melkumyan played. Here we even have a nice photo of him smiling at this moment after he pushed h5, so let's just enjoy that for a moment. And of course Levon doesn't want to allow, he doesn't want to see h4 on the board, so he pushes h4 himself. And the time on the clock was 13.5 minutes Levon and 16 minutes Carlsen, so Magnus had more here than when he started. We have knight to e4 by Magnus, putting pressure on the f2 pawn, although for the moment it's protected. e3, blocking the dark square bishop, and rook to c8 now. And here finally Levon captures. We have knight captures, pawn captures, and now queen to d1, going after the h5 pawn, and here bishop to f5. There's also the sneaky bishop to g4, but it doesn't do all that much for black. f3, knight captures on g3, you give up the bishop, and now queen captures on h4, and it's a sneaky position, but most likely Carlsen checked ideas like this at home, and he knows that it doesn't work. Queen f3 defense, you do grab the rook, but after rook captures here, it's yes, white has 2 bishops for a rook, and even though black has 6 pawns, white has only 4. It shouldn't be a problem for white. So after bishop to f5, we have queen captures on h5, and now you have to defend your bishop. I hope none of you are considering g6 to allow something like queen to h8 mate. Don't forget about our good friend the bishop on b2. So after queen to h5, we have queen to d7, defending the bishop, also preparing bishop to h3 at some point. Queen back to d1, it was just a pawn grab, and now c5, continuing this expansion, which is possible in this line. In the line that Melkumyan played, the pawn was here, so it was somewhat problematic. And here you can't really dislodge this knight with a bishop capture, because then you just weaken your light squares too much. We have rook to e1, and now rook c to d8. We have rook to c1, bringing the last rook into the game, and now bishop to h3 by Magnus. We have queen to f3, and now f6, numbing the dark square bishop. We have bishop captures on h3, queen captures on h3, and now rook c to d1. And Magnus continues to push on the queen side with b5. One of these pawns is coming forward at some point, so Levin has to take all of these pawn pushes into consideration. We have queen to g2, Levin offers a queen trade, and queen back to e6. Of course, Magnus not interested. We have f3, pushing the knight back. There's this, or you allow this knight to remain here forever. We have knight back to d6, and now g4. And here Magnus has to decide whether he wants to block the position with b4, whether he wants to go knight e7, remaneuver this knight over to e5, challenge Levin whether he wants to further expand with f4 to create some additional weaknesses, but he goes for the straightforward d4. As Levin is lower on time, he takes this opportunity to make him waste more time. And here Levin goes queen to d2. Also, you could go e captures on d4, but then you just get queen captures here, and the two rooks for a queen are well worth it. Check, king moves, now rook here, threatening to come to e2, and well, black will just win this very nicely. So, after d4, we have queen to d2 by Levin, and now queen to d5, putting pressure on the f3 pawn. Levin says, okay, e captures on d4, says, do you want to capture on f3? And it's a really complicated line, but Magnus decides against it. If queen captures here, you get queen g2, queen to f4 now, avoiding the trade, d captures on c5, and now rook captures on e1. Rook captures on e1, and now you get this position where, well, it's an open board, anything can happen, but even though white's king is a bit more exposed, Magnus doesn't enjoy this, but because it's not all that easy to play. Plus, you do have to worry about the pass pawn. Knight f7, c6 is coming. It's impossible to calculate this position. So we have c4 by Magnus instead. He plays it, but it is the strongest move recommended by the engine. And now you already have some ideas of b4 followed by c3 if possible, and Levin has to decide what to do here. First, Levin goes bishop to a3. Gets the bishop out of the way. He doesn't want this pawn reaching c3 while the bishop is there. So bishop to a3 puts pressure on the knight here. And now Magnus goes queen captures on f3. So what changed that the queen captures on f3 is playable now? Well, Levin goes queen to g2. And now rook captures on e1. Rook captures and queen back to c3 now, putting pressure on the d4 pawn and also on the rook on e1. We have rook to d1, getting rid of both threats, but now b4. This is what changed. So those were the three threats: the capture on d4, capture here, and the b4. Levin couldn't have stopped both of them. Bishop back to b2. Now the queen guards it, so you have to move the queen. Queen e3 check. Queen to f2 blocks, and queen to h3 now. So what's Carlsen's idea? He wants to capture on g4 with check and pick up the rook on d1. So queen back to g2, offering a queen trade while guarding the g4 pawn. And here you could capture on h4, but Magnus decides against it. Magnus goes for queen to e3 once again, queen to f2, and now queen to e4, going after the g4 pawn this way. And here, which prevents white from eliminating the c4 pawn, and that's crucial. If you allow c3, then it's just bad. But you have to guard against this. Queen g2, now Magnus pushes c3 and creates a very strong passed c3 pawn. Bishop back to c1, and now even c2. So you have to go rook f1. If you go up the board, then just queen e1 check threatens to win the bishop. After you block rook e8, it's just a dominating position for Magnus. So after c2, we have rook to f1. And now comes queen captures on d4. Queen captures on d4 with check, king to h2, and now queen to e5 with check again. We have king to g1, and now queen to c5 with check. Now the c2 pawn is nicely protected. We have king to h2, and now knight to f7, finally preparing to bring this knight into the game. And Levin, without all that many ideas and without a lot of time, Levin has some 20 seconds on the clock, whereas Magnus is above 2 minutes, pushes g5. And okay, queen e5 check again. We have king. You cannot trade queens. If you trade queens, then just captures, and rook to d1 eliminates all of white's counterplay. You cannot capture, you cannot move the rook. It's just a terrible position. So after queen e5, we have king to h1, but now rook to d1. Again, you cannot capture because the c2 pawn just queens, and you cannot capture the c2 pawn because rook captures on f1. You'll be leaving the rook undefended. So g6 by 11, knight back to d8, and now queen to f3. And here Magnus should continue with the rook d4, just creating some additional threats. But like in the game against Maxime, it seems that Magnus is so confident in his endgame skills that he just wants to trade down as soon as possible. So he plays rook captures on f1, queen captures, and queen to e4 with check. We have queen to g2, now defending, and queen captures on h4 with check. We have king to g1, and now queen back to d4 with check. King to h2, and here queen to d1. The problem is, here Levon has queen to e4, and this is what Magnus missed. Now you cannot capture the bishop because queen to e... Whoa, so sorry about that. Because queen to e8 is mate, and here Magnus went for his famous head shake. He was very unpleased with the turn of events. He had to play king to f8, but now he loses the b4 pawn with check. We have king to e8, and now queen to b5 with check. King to e7, and here queen to c5 with check. So it's very unlikely that Carlsen will be able to wiggle out of all the checks. Bishop to a3 wasn't doing all that much, so queen to c5 check instead. King to e6, and now queen to c8 with check. Here king to e5 was played, and this is the magical moment of the game. Feel free to pause the video here and try to guess the move that Levon played. Don't look for the best move, just try to guess the move Levon played while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it and find any move on the board, there are a lot of good moves here. Just continue checking the king, queen c5 check, queen b8 check, continue checking the black king. However, Levon played a really weird move. Here, Levon played queen to b7, and that's just weird. Everyone was like, what? I don't know. There's no way to explain why this happened, but he did put his queen on b7. Magnus just captured it, and that's just it. That was a nice queen capture, and well, yes, it was in this position on move 58 that Levon Aronian resigned the game in a way that I don't think he ever resigned the game. But it happens, if you look at it throughout chess history, players did blunders like this, in short time trouble. In time trouble, Levon was in time trouble here, so it happens. Barev's, mate in one against Karpov, Chakin Anand also mate in one, Kramnik missing mate in one against Deep Fritz. So it happens. But yeah. Really awesome stuff. After this king e5 move, just queen to b7. It's crazy stuff. But yeah, this does wonders for Carlsen, as he is now again the sole leader, grabbing a full point against Levon Aronian, and with 3 more rounds to go, it's going to be very interesting to see if Magnus can keep this up. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. Levon will, I don't know how Levon will recover after this for the next 3 games. Will be very impressed if he does. I would like to thank Michael Carey, Pete Ponrobles, Victor Klein, David Groskind, and Predrag Zerdo for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the FIDE World Rapid and Blitz Championship until it ends for the next 3 days. So thank you all, I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your Saturday.